morning. My name is Dan Griffey. I'm running for State House of Representatives in the 35th District, position number 1. A little about myself is I'm a professional firefighter, and I'd like to take a moment to talk about 9/11. It's fitting that we're meeting this morning on 9/11. I ask that everyone always remember and never forget the tragedy, and always remember what sacrifices of 343 firefighters and law officers that passed away gave for us. I'm a lifelong resident of the 35th District. I'm married, I have 3 daughters. And one of the main reasons why I decided to run for this office is because of that. When as a kid, I remember a vibrant rural community with vibrant rural jobs, values, and traditions. Some ridiculous regulations imposed by the federal government and reiterated by the state government, spotted owl, caused the price of logs to go up considerably, which pretty much priced out of existence the industry that kept my rural community up and running. That industry supported other rural jobs, other rural industries and rural businesses. That pretty much put Mason County, Mason, Grace Harbor County at the time as part of the 35th District, into a position of that they couldn't support themselves. Then we got hit in the rural communities with the Growth Management Act, and the Growth Management Act pretty much took away the private property owners' ability to manage their own property and put it in the hands of centralized government. Not even the local government controls it with growth management. And I think it's time we do something real for the middle class and put them back to work. The way we put them back to work is reducing taxes and regulations imposed on our businesses to long-term, low, predictable levels. Let's suspend the Growth Management Act and give it back to the rural communities to make the decisions. So if a property owner wants to do something with their property, whether it's conserve the property or change the use of the property, they only have to talk to county commissioners to make those decisions. Let's do the things we can do to get our state spending under control and pass the Taxpayer Protection Act requiring a 2/3 majority vote to raise taxes as a constitutional amendment to the state of Washington. I thank you for your time. My name is Dan Griffey, and I appreciate your vote.
Thank you, Dan. Kathy?
Well, thank you. I'm glad to be here. Glad I woke up early enough to get here. I am a veterinarian who's been in practice in Shelton, Washington now for 34 years, to my amazement. I am married. My husband and I have had to practice together there, and then we have 2 children that are well grown now. I have a son who is now 30 years old, went to WSU, graduated from vet school, and came back and is now working in the practice with us, which gives me a little more time to do this stuff, and it's really great. And my second son went to Evergreen State College. He's a musician and hopefully will be very well self-employed someday. He's a great kid. I got into this work because I believe strongly in public education. You know, before I ran for office, I didn't really know if I was a Democrat or Republican. I think I thought of myself as an independent. But I really believe in public education, public funding for education, and I also really believed it needed to change. When I walked my son into a kindergarten class, it was overcrowded, and the superintendent was the same person as the principal, was the same person as the first grade teacher because the school was so out of money. I got involved, tried to help the school get better. Within 9 months, I was on the school board, and I worked on that school board for 12 years. Learned a lot about how funds come to the school districts, but not as much as to where the money comes from. I believe that the state does hold the responsibility. I think that's what our Constitution says. And when I got involved and decided to run for the legislature in 1998, one of the issues was a simple majority rule on school levy issues. That was a constitutional change that it took more and more people to get elected, and it finally went to a vote of the people. And simple majority rule on school levies is, I believe, constitutional, and I do believe it's democracy. I support that strongly. In the last few years, my focus has had to remain on education, training for people to be able to get jobs, get a better degree for high school education, so that when kids graduate from high school, they're ready to get a job or get into a preceptorship or an apprenticeship. And I've also really become very aware of those first 5 years of a child's education and how much of a difference we can make for successful students all the way through if we are able to support those students, give them the kind of education they need, which mainly means support their parents to be their first teachers. So I have been working pretty hard to raise awareness in the business community as to what each of us can do to really support quality education programs, early childhood especially. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. And since we started off with Dan for the question period, then again, you'll have 1 minute to respond. We'll start with Kathy. And it looks like you get a softball for starters this morning. How's that? Warm me up a little bit. The question is, how do you feel, or what do you feel, is the most crucial thing facing our state? Kathy?
Well, it's jobs. We have basically survived the last 3 or 4 years in this state, but we are creeping along with job opportunities. Not only people losing their jobs, but also a lot of kids coming out of college ready to go to work and the jobs not being there. I think the jobs are coming back, and I think our state has done some things to really help that. Some of the basic industries are here and actually growing. Boeing is a big part of that. Another one is Microsoft and Intel. In Bremerton, I think the biggest issue has been the work that we've done to make sure that the Navy remains in Bremerton. About 7, 8 years ago, there was a big BRAC process going on where we were looking at closing bases all over this country. And I was on the Veterans and Military Affairs Committee. We worked very hard to make sure that the federal government knew we want the bases here, we've kept the bases here, and that Navy base here is a huge part of jobs in our community in this area.
Thank you. And Dan?
So, yeah, the biggest issue facing the 35th District in Washington State is jobs and the economy. And what we must do is reduce taxes and regulation to long-term predictable levels so we can encourage private capital to be invested in Washington State again instead of encouraging it to go to other states. It is tragic what we do to our businesses. If you ask in simple terms, the amount of money that our businesses lose in just idle time on our local our infrastructure highways, where they have their freight on the trucks and they're just idling because of our traffic issues that we've absolutely have ignored in Washington State. We're building a brand new bridge across Lake Washington, and that brand new bridge is going to have light rail instead of heavy rail. Heavy rail freight infrastructure has to be something we talk about, and that is part and parcel to the jobs and the economy question. How are you going to get your goods and services from your business once you employ the people and make that product? Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. So now I'm moving on to a chronic question that's actually been asked by our audiences consecutively, and apparently a concern that's carried through. And it has to do with how should we as a state address the issue of the underfunded state pension system. How will you address this issue?
That's my question.
I'm sorry, yes. Dan.
Thank you. So there's quite a few ways to address it. I have an idea for the firefighters' pension, since the firefighters pay a considerable portion of their pension, that the firefighters could take over the fully funding of their pension. It is something that, talking with firefighters, they would be willing to do because they're kind of tired of the legislature dipping, not dipping into, but threatening to dip into their pension. The other way we can deal with it is go to the other stakeholders and come up with similar thought processes to save the pensions. The biggest issue here is it is deferred income in the most part for these employees. And that deferred income is a promise that you made for the future funding of their pensions. I think it's kind of criminal to go to an employee and say you've paid into something, counting on a pension for so many years, and then we're just going to change that on you. Thank you.
Well, not all the pension systems are in that bad shape for the state, but probably the biggest one has been Pos.1, Ters.1. And the way the system works, I mean, you have workers who are paying into that system, but that money, millions and millions of dollars in it, is in market. And so we were doing fine until the market crashed. And then it was, oh my goodness, what's going to happen? So if the market comes back and does well, our pension systems are going to be in a lot better shape. And they're invested in the long term. The next issue is how many people are retiring and living longer. So, we rely on the people who are working to be paying into it too as money goes out. But if the state is having less and less people, we have actually reduced numbers of people doing the physical work, and technology is being part of that. But you don't have the same number of people paying into the system. So there are some real challenges there.
Thank you. And moving on to another issue of chronic concern for our audience members, and this is you, Kathy, to start off. How do we solve one of our biggest problems, funding education at all levels? In 1 minute.
Oh, man. So I probably have 3 meetings this week on it. I've probably been going to meetings once a month for the last 2 or 3 months, trying to get out ahead of some of the committees that we've set up to actually say that this is how we're going to pay for it. And I can't tell you how we're going to pay. Basically, the courts have told us by the year 2018 we need to be putting $4 billion more into our public education system. The beauty of that is that it will take the pressure off of the local property taxes that you've been voting for every 3 or 4 years to make up for the amount that the state hasn't paid. So your property tax levies for schools and the amount of money you've got to vote for every 2 years should go down. But where do we get the money? At this point in this state, the biggest funds are sales tax. And I don't think people are going to want an income tax, and I think people will have to support whatever proposal we make. So I suspect it will be an increase in sales tax somewhere along the way. But it will go to a vote.
Thank you.
So my idea was fund education first in a standalone budget. First thing in the budget to fund, last thing in the state to cut. Our priority seems to be fund education last and cut education as the basic first cut. If we do, I thank Kathy Haig for sponsoring. She co-sponsored a bill, Fund Education First. It didn't make it out of committee, but it was quite disappointing that it didn't make it out of committee. But it is a step in the right direction. The other thing the McCleary decision gives us an ability to do. The McCleary decision was the judgment by the Supreme Court against the state legislature, is it allows us to deregulate our schools. So it says, in essence, is stop putting unfunded mandates as imposed on our schools. I talked to a lot of superintendents in the area, and if we reduce regulations we impose on our businesses, they could do a lot more for less. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I know this is out of, can I say one more thing and let Dan say something too, because we both feel strongly about this, but there's one more issue I'd really like to throw out to people.
How much time would you like? Would you like
At
5
30
minutes?
seconds is
Would you like
fine.
5 minutes?
30 seconds.
30 seconds.
Funding education first is really important. What I think is, if we're going to find the dollars that are actually going to have to be supported by the people, they're going to have to see where that money comes from and where that money goes. If we try to collect dollars and throw it into the general fund, I don't think people are going to support it. So the reason I signed on to Education First, I really believe the education budget should be completely separate from general fund budget, and people should be able to see the dollars that they're putting into that it goes to schools, not someplace else.
Very good. Yeah.
Since the paramount duty of Washington State, as imposed by our state constitution, is fund education and to educate our children, we should fund it first in a standalone budget, and it shouldn't suffer. It should be the best thing we do in Washington State. Right now, with current leadership, it is one of the worst things we do. The stability and predictability of funding in our school systems is tragic. What we did retroactive cuts 2 years ago to our schools. How do you cut money out of the budget you've already spent?
Good. And you have an opportunity. Do you want to extend this conversation or not?
Well,
Oh.
What's that? No, that's okay, unless Kathy has more she wants to say on it, because I can talk for a long time.
I'm sorry, I should respect
Okay,
you.
well, let me continue on this same vein, because there is another question from our audience member on the same topic. So this may further our understanding a little bit more what you want to share with us. This question is, considering the whole education system, early learning to higher ed, what is your funding priority?
And my first,
I believe so.
K-12 would be my first priority, and then the higher education system. I consider all-day kindergarten as my early childhood learning. Kathy talks about from birth to kindergarten as early childhood. I think birth is a little early for government to get involved in our lives, and way early for them to get involved in parenting. So that is kind of where we differ, but K-12 would be first, and then the higher education college systems. Thank you.
Well, I came into this job saying K-12, K-12, and I fought hard for full-day kindergarten. But I've learned a lot about early childhood brain development, and we're actually going to be having a big seminar on it the 12th of January in Olympia, trying to get people to understand. Kids' brains are actually being programmed in those first 5 years of life, and the damage is done at that point. We can't make up for it, and those are the same kids that end up in our jails and in our mental institutions if they're really abused and not given what they need in those first 5 years. Food, security, and learning languages, those kind of things. And so we already have over 50% of the babies that are being born are already on government funding. They're already on government funding. So I say if we're going to invest in these kids, we're going to have these kids, somehow we have to really improve our early childhood system.
Thank you.
I
started it.
This one goes to Kathy.
Okay.
Because apparently we're drilling down further on the education issue. This is a very hot topic for our audience members this morning. And the question is, if you fund education first, what cuts would you make elsewhere in the budget to come up with that money? And that goes to Kathy.
Yeah, we've already made a lot of cuts, and unfortunately, the things that are not mandated, there's only about 70% of the budget left that isn't under contract, under constitutional mandate, and so it's a pretty small amount of money. Health and Human Services are definitely at risk. We're spending less money or sending less money to hospitals and emergency rooms. Even our fire departments and emergency management systems are struggling mightily from the cuts that they've had to take. So, and then the other one is just a public assistance. People who are living on the streets, and we've been trying to support food banks, and we've been trying to support some kind of housing for them on really cold nights and those kind of things. We've cut back, and we can cut back again, but those are the people that end up on the streets holding signs up, needing money, needing food, and they're also the people that then break into your houses and really create more problems and cost more money in the long run.
So I'll start off with, I agree with Kathy, 50% of the children being on public assistance is the problem in Washington State. We need to put their family members back to work, and the funding, then maybe we wouldn't have to do the K-12 or birth to kindergarten funding first. All departments in the state would have to be subjected to intense scrutiny. We need to start by eliminating duplicate services, which we have not done. Even though we've done a lot of cutting, we have not ended duplicate services. If we haven't ended all the duplicate services, then there is areas that we can still cut. We need to go back to zero-based budgeting and start from zero and prove your budget. Everybody here has heard of the fact that a government entity has to spend all of their budget on these lavish things at the very end. That does exist, or they will not get their budget for the next year. These things have to be talked about.
Thank you. And I believe the final question on education, and it simply is, do you support charter schools?
I support an experiment that would deregulate our schools and let the schools thrive without government intervention. If a charter school accomplished that, I don't think the current charter school initiative accomplishes a completely deregulated school process. So I don't know that that's the way to do it, and we kind of lose a little bit of the local control over that. So I support a deregulated school, and I think that's what the effort in most states for charter schools, to prove in an experiment that deregulation is going to help education, not hurt it. Thank you.
Kathy?
I don't support charter schools. I think the state has said that 3 times by a vote of the people. I believe that we have created many options for kids to go to other sorts of programs, including our skill centers, as well as Aviation High School, Delta High School. There are many other options out there, and we need to expand those options, especially kids that need a little extra help, a little extra time. I believe that charter schools are really all about profits for big business, and there is big business in educating kids. It costs a lot of money, and you can look at Green Spot Industries is just hoping and praying that we will open up charter schools so they can move into the state and make money. I believe in local control. It takes local control completely away. And I think the biggest issue for us in some of the more rural communities is charter schools and the system that they put in place will risk closure of our small schools and small communities all across the state. And I disagree with that.
Thank you. All right, so now let me move on to a business-related question, which is, and I'll gladly repeat this to you if you need to. The question is, the automatic minimum wage increase is slowly killing the restaurant industry. Servers make better money when they have the staff to give better service. Do you support freezing the minimum wage increase to save the restaurant industry? Kathy?
Well, it was done by a vote of the people, and I believe maybe that's a proposal out there that we would vote on, but I think it would pretty quickly go back to a vote of the people, and I think it probably would go down again. So I don't think changing minimum wage, the rate that we set may need to change, because there's 2 different methods that you can calculate that, and the method that they chose in that initiative puts it up quite a bit faster. My son, the musician, is in the service industry in Olympia, and the amount of money that he makes in wages is pretty minimal. $9, what is it, $9.04 or something minimum wage, but the tip is pretty significant. He is living off the tips, but that doesn't do anything for retirement, it doesn't do anything for health care, it doesn't do anything for real stability. So I believe that tip credit is another way to get to those dollars, and I'm still considering that.
Thank you. And then?
So the government arbitrarily setting what a business would pay is inherently a problem. It's one of the reasons why our unemployment is so high. It's one of the reasons our high minimum wage is why workers new to the workforce have hard times getting jobs, because you got to pay somebody such a high wage to get into in a training position. So it is. I think at this point in time, our accelerator that we use in Washington State, it's obviously too high. We are one of the highest minimum wages in the state of Washington. And again, it does hurt workers new to the workforce. One of the things that I think people don't understand is if you do a study, only about 5% of the workforce actually makes minimum wage. So businesses found out that it's a good idea to pay people more than minimum wage.
Very good, thank you. So now moving, taking a turn from small business, let's talk about transportation. What can we do to improve our transportation system, and how do we pay for it?
Well, there's several ideas I have. So the first thing is we need to be talking like other states have talked and merging our major ports into regional port authorities. So they're not, they work together and instead of competing against each other. The states that have done that are seeing great success. We need to be talking about inland rail port systems that that will feed into those ports. That new port authority. That port authority's ability to raise money will help us invest into those regional inland rail port systems. And the private industry will come in and help us develop that if we build it, they will come, pretty much. That's my idea.
Thank you. Kathy?
Oh, freight mobility, I think that is definitely something to consider. Ports, again, are locally elected, so you'll be giving up locally elected officials and your voice on those issues. So, but maybe it'll work. This is the first I've heard you say that. We have a huge problem in transportation because we pay for our roads with gas taxes, and we have many more cars now instead of driving 15 miles to the gallon or 30, 40 miles to the gallon. And so the actual amount of gas that people are buying for the miles that they drive is going down. There's a lot more cars on the roads, and congestion is a huge issue. I'm not sure how we're going to get out of it, but again, I'm pretty sure transportation is going to have to come up with a certain amount of money and make a proposal that's going to have to go to a vote of the people to raise the dollars. In this area, the huge issue is the ferry system. Funding the ferry system has been a huge challenge since 1995, and federal government is going to help a little bit, I think.
Thank you. So now, staying on the same topic as far as transportation, this question is specific. It says, Washington State Constitution prohibits the use of gas tax to be used on the ferry system. Would you support use of Washington State ferries being exempt from paying the gas tax? Kathy?
The ferry is exempt from paying the gas tax, which is the money that then comes back to them.
Which is not coming back to them. This says Washington State Constitution prohibits the use of gas tax to be used on the ferry system. So the ferries don't benefit from the gas tax.
I'm not sure that's true.
According by this,
They get some, and then it's not just the ferries and the gas. They also have to pay for the ramps and the whole service on either end.
Interpret the question as you may.
Funding for the ferry systems is difficult. There are huge issues when we actually were going to use the license plates, the license tabs. Remember 695? And it was going to build ferries, and it was going to really expand service. And when people voted 695 and did away with the more than $30 licensing, which is still more, it was a huge cut and an ongoing millions and millions of dollars that is not going into the ferries. I believe we do need to find a new funding system for the ferries. And if you make an exception for ferries to not pay the gas tax, pretty soon there are going to be others. Federal government especially would say, if you're not charging it there, then we don't want to pay it here. So that it's a slippery slope if you start exempting anybody from the gas taxes.
So it's been a pet peeve of mine. In the fire service, we're a tax-supported entity, we pay gas tax. The ferries is a state-supported entity, and they pay tax on the fuel they purchase. They also pay, on any project they do in Washington State, they pay sales tax. It seems to me like we're just laundering money through the state of Washington. So let's liberate let's cut out the middleman and let them keep the money locally for each individual department. It absolutely makes sense. We do not have to send it to the state of Washington so we can use it up there and then send it back. We have got to be smarter about the way we do things here. We can't do these things anymore. Thank you.
All right. So let's move on to the budget. And the question is, there is always a budget crisis, and we are always told that essential services must be cut or taxes raised. Is there a better, more sustainable solution?
Well, as I alluded to before, in all the cuts we made in the state of Washington, we still have not ended the duplication of services. We decided to put together an information technology building, a brand new one, and now that was at a cost of about $340 million, and we now decided that maybe cloud computing is a cheaper, better way to do it after doing the infrastructure investment. There is better ways. It means that we cut out the waste. We go back to zero-based budgeting, or go implement zero-based budgeting to where each department has to justify their budget instead of spending the money. I heard even this last year, a good friend of mine works for DOT. They had to spend $50,000 on new furniture because they had to spend that budget, or they were going to lose it the next year. We've got to justify our budgets. We have to respect that the citizens are suffering and spend our money wisely.
Thank you.
So we're not always in a budget crisis, but we have sure been in a budget crisis for the last 4 years. And it does force us to do zero-based budgeting. I mean, that's basically, we've actually, instead of having just a big committee that does the whole budget, we actually formed 3 subcommittees: education funding, health and human services funding, and then general government and criminal justice. And the people on those committees, I mean, many more people doing the work, drill down in every single agency to figure out how this money is being spent. Some of the biggest places that we made huge changes, unfortunately, were in parks and recreation, unfortunately. We tried to find some other ways to fund it, but that's how far down. We didn't just send it to the department and say, you fix it. But Dan is completely right. The use it or lose it mentality of how government drives dollars out does make agencies use up the money at the end, because if they don't, they won't get it. And funding outcome-based funding is where we've got to go.
Thank you. So staying on the issue of budget, the question to you, Kathy, to answer is, would you raise taxes next year to balance the budget? And if so, which ones?
Well, any proposal that we make in taxes will go to the people. So I'm not going to vote all alone. I mean, that's just my philosophy. In this state, with the way the initiative process is, we could put something in place. You'd have to get 60% to do it, but it would still go to a vote of the people. I'm sure somebody would bring it up, and I'm sure people would sign it. So whatever we talk about, and I think in this case it's going to have to be about education funding, because the courts have said about $4 billion more by the year 2018. So I think you will see a proposal. We have gone through probably 200 different ways to raise taxes or cut spending that would be of any significance, and the only one that comes anywhere near being able to raise $1 billion a year over the next 4 years is sales tax. So I think you will see a sales tax proposal, and in my mind, the only way I'll do it is if it's absolutely going to the education budget, and it's a separate budget.
Thank you. Dan?
Kathy, the best way to raise $1 billion is to reduce the unemployment rate back to what it was before the recession hit. That is almost nearly $1 billion back to Washington State's economy. What we have to do is be very disciplined in our approach. No, I will not raise taxes. The reason I won't raise taxes, people are still suffering, our businesses are still suffering. And how Washington State seems to inevitably go after more regulations and more taxation to get in the pockets of business. And then the businesses take their money out of the state of Washington, and our citizens can't go to work. If our citizens go back to work and more people pay, then we'll have more money. It is a very disciplined approach. The undisciplined approach would be to raise taxes in this critical time. We've got to be smart about how we do this. We've got to encourage private business, private capital to come back to Washington State and put Washington back to work. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. So, staying on the same issue of taxes, one of our audience members asked, do you support an income tax? Why or why not? Dan?
I do not support an income tax. All the proposals out there, and I think for quite a few reasons, I don't think the people support an income tax, number one. And I'm going to support the funding method that the people support the most. Number two, when you have a sales tax, I hear that it's this highly regressive tax. But when we don't tax food in the state of Washington, it is not You can make up your mind what you spend your money on. You can decide to cut back. And an income tax, it's the government just gets your money. And so with a sales tax, the state's budget retracts with the people's ability to pay the money. I do not support an income tax at all. Thank you.
Thank you. Kathy?
Yeah, if the people of this state wanted an income tax, we would have had some options. It's been on the ballot, and people said no, even if it only taxed income on somebody making $250,000 or more. So no, I don't think that's a proposal that I'm going to support, and I don't think anybody else is either. Again, if we were going to do that, I think it would have to come from the people, not from the legislature, because we'd have to get 60% to support it, and that's just, it's not a reality. The problem in this state, though, is that Oregon, who is, you know, especially along Clark County in that area, they don't have sales tax, they just have income tax. And it ends up, in both ways, hurting people in Washington more than it hurts the business and people in Oregon. And I wish there was a way that we could come together. I think, well, that's a problem. It's a real problem. But no, I don't support an income tax. I don't. It just wouldn't work.
Okay, thank you. So on a similar issue is, do you support the 2/3 supermajority? Why or why not? Kathy?
And no, I don't. I got into this job because I could see how the 60% majority rule on school levies hurt schools and really made the minority of the people, the 40% of the people out there, plus one, could shut down 60% of the people. So we'd lose a levy with, 11,000 people voting yes and 9,500 voting no. It just, the numbers didn't make sense to me. I don't believe that's democratic, and I don't support it. In the legislature, I believe, if you've got a legislator that really believes in an issue and wants to vote for it, I think the same rule should be 50% plus one is what passes. The control you have as a society is, if you don't like the way your legislator votes, you vote them out. Oh, by the way, that too is by a simple majority. And I believe in 50% plus one. That's democratic.
Thank you. And Dan?
I do support the 2/3 majority requirement as imposed on the legislature to raise taxes. I think it should be exceptionally easy for the legislature to reduce taxes and very, very hard for them to raise taxes. The voters of my district voted 70% in favor of those rules. So a supermajority voted to constrain Representative Haig. And her saying that it's a democracy at work, a supermajority democracy vote told her, should have given her a mandate that they want her to have that. And I agree with her. The choice we have when our legislators vote contrary to our beliefs in a very super majority, is to vote them out of office. And it's time we do that. I support the 2/3 majority so much that I'm willing to memorialize it in a Taxpayer Protection Act and put it as a constitutional amendment in our Washington State's Constitution. Thank you.
Thank you. So a final question specifically regarding about budgets and taxes and issues comes from one of our audience members who says, help, I say help. What are you planning to do to run government more efficiently and tighten your belts like we had to do in the last few years? Just a little help, please.
As I've talked over and over again, I support a 2/3 majority requirement to raise taxes. I think that makes government work a lot harder. I don't believe that we've dug deep enough to end all duplicate services in the state of Washington. I think fraud and abuse of our social services systems can be greatly changed to make sure we're helping the people that need help, and the people that are abusing the system aren't going to continue to get the services. It's going to take an all-inclusive approach. All departments in the state of Washington have to be subject to the same scrutiny, because our main job as legislators is to manage the citizens' money to the best of our ability. Thank you.
So I thought that said something about on a personal level. On a personal level, I did reduce the amount of money that I got paid base, and I also I don't take any money on a monthly basis to pay myself back for driving around or my phone and that kind of thing. And I just never have. I am a small business person. I owned a business for a long time. I want government to be as efficient as possible, and I believe I do this job because I believe in service to the community much more than this is an income that I would live on. I have that luxury. Many other legislators don't, but I do this because I love the job, not because I'm making money at it. There are many things that can be consolidated and save money. We've done things like consolidate services around early childhood in the Department of Early Learning. We've consolidated other services. But when you make an agency bigger, you lose efficiency. DSHS would be the example of that. So you have to think very carefully about just consolidating to save money.
Thank you. All right, so the next question is, have you attended a Port of Bremerton meeting in the last year or been involved in the Port of Bremerton? If not, why not? Kathy?
Well, I did attend, and we visited the new boat sales place, and I keep in pretty close contact with Roger quite a bit. So, but coming to the port meetings themselves, no. I've been to the port meeting many times. In Mason County, we have some huge issues there around maintaining our fairgrounds, which are on the port. So those two port meetings I've been to, but I haven't been to Thurston County yet, so I don't get to all the port meetings.
Thank you. Dan?
Port of Bremerton specifically, I have not attended their meetings yet. That's, I'm going to have to do that. The newest elected port commissioner keeps me apprised quite regularly because he's a friend of mine of the goings on in the port. Some of the issues that they have facing that they're working on is the SKIA project. Also Safe Boat, making sure Safe Boat stays a major employer in Kitsap County and that bleeds over into Mason County, so it supports both a lot of the 35th jobs in the 35th district. So the Port of Bremerton is very key to the 35th success. They would also be key in making sure a regional freight delivery system actually works. So I will work closely with all of the port commissioners in the Port of Bremerton. Thank you.
Thank you. And this is a follow-up question to that, and that is whether you attended the Port of Bremerton meeting or not. The follow-up question is, how can you help the Port of Bremerton accelerate the economic development of the SKIA? And that goes to them.
It goes to me?
Yes.
The one thing that I've talked about for quite a long time, if we, instead of talked about building the Belfair bypass, we actually built the Belfair bypass, it would give us access to the lands up where SKIA development's going to be. It would help us in that endeavor. But we spent millions of dollars wasting money on different groups. We've had county commissioners come up with ideas how to fund it. We've had the state legislators kind of take the ball. But we haven't had anybody really push it through. Fred Finn got closest, I think, the last time, Representative Fred Finn. But I think the best way to do that is to develop that road that is really going to help Belfair. The congestion in Belfair is just at times a nightmare. It's hurting business. We need to build the bypass. I think that helps with the infrastructure for SKIA.
And I would agree. I think the Belfair bypass would be job one for real economic development in the 35th district, and I think it would help a lot for the Bremerton Port because it's just right outside of the Mason County line. Working with DOT on this issue, it's an issue of money and an issue of priorities, and it has been a real struggle. We've come close a few times, but we haven't made it, and like I said to Dan before, I think we should just build a rock road, just a logging road, and people would start using it, and then eventually they would chip and seal it, and then they would put some lines on it and some signs on it, and pretty soon we'd have a road. That's exactly how we've developed at least 2 other roads in Mason County, was we started with a logging road. So I keep trying to say that's what I think we should do. There have been many times that the state has already invested in the Port of Bremerton. We've done some pretty major investments on capital budget and that kind of thing, and keep it going, but we have to stay close with them, and I try to do that.
And now for our last question from the question and answer period is, our area is home to a lot of veterans and their families. Nearly a quarter of the voters are vets. What do you believe are their needs, and how do you propose to help them?
So our veterans really rely on federal government investment. Federal taxes are what come back to this area, and for the Navy and for the shipyards. I believe we've really come up short for them on healthcare issues, especially, and then retirement issues. I think if we believe they are the great defenders of freedom, we should be willing to invest our tax dollars in it. And cutting funding for our federal government is really where you go with that. On the other hand, our state has done we've passed many bills that the veterans have asked for us to do. I think 4 or 5 years ago was when I just had gone off the Veterans and Military Affairs Committee, and the governor signed 12 bills that were requested by veterans. But healthcare is their biggest issue. Cost of healthcare, getting quality healthcare close to home instead of having to go to Seattle or Tacoma to do it.
Thank you. And Ben?
So there's two things. What they suffer from, mental disease, when they come back, we ask them as a nation to do things that we should never ask people to do. And it affects them, and it affects them miserably, and it's tragic when I see it. So we have substance abuse that goes along with the mental disease, and it's part of the mental disease process. We have got to, through Veterans Affairs Committee, we have got to force Congress to stand up and do what they said they were going to do, and take care of the men and women that we sent into harm's way. The state of Washington can be a resource and a tool for getting those services out to the veterans. But we have got to be committed to doing it. Whether we lobby our local congressional delegation to make it happen, or we find a way locally to make it happen through private donations, whatever we got to do. It's our commitment. We made it. We have to live up to it. Thank you.
And so now we come to our summary section, where each candidate is allowed 2 minutes to provide a summary statement to you all, our audience. We started with Dan this morning, so we'll begin with Kathy. Kathy, 2 minutes, please.
Well, again, thank you for being here this morning, and I thought they were good questions, especially when they get right down to some of the tougher issues on funding for education. Education will remain my focus. That's where I've been plugged in pretty hard and long. But I also understand that education is kind of the key that turns for people to get jobs. A lot of businesses are looking for people that have certain skills, and they can't find them. We've got to find a way to get the opportunity to get the skills and knowledge, whether they're going to fix cars, or they're going to build houses, or they're going to put in plumbing. And we've walked away from that in a big way in our high schools. You do have West Sound, but I think we can do a lot more in the schools to really help kids get the skills and knowledge they need, as well as in the community college. I've really been pretty strategic in helping to fund the education for engineering, especially the engineering that is needed specifically on the boats. And there's, again, those partnerships between business and education are what make it work, so that what we're teaching students of all ages, when they get done, they have real jobs ready to go, and these are living wage jobs. I think access to health care is a huge issue, not just for veterans, but for all of our seniors. I don't know exactly how the Affordable Care Health Act is going to really play out in Washington State, but I know that our model of basic health, which is an individual payer rated at how much money you make, so that nobody just gets it for nothing. Everybody puts something into the system. And I think that if the federal government does come up with the money that they've said they would over the next 3 years to support that, that it's going to help in a huge way to get everybody some health care that they can afford. And then affordable, safe, and affordable housing is a huge issue in Bremerton, and I will continue to work on that one too.
Thank you. Dan?
I thank all of you for your time this morning and putting up with our pontifications. It is time, if you answer this question, are you better off 14 years ago, better off now than you were 14 years ago? If you truly answer that question, no, then you have to ask yourself if it's time to take a new direction in Washington State. If it's time to truly liberate our businesses so that private capital can come to Washington State and we can put people back to work. Is it time that we want to do something real for the 35th District, for the middle class, by putting them back to work? I agree. Actually, I say it all the time, investing in vocational skills in our high schools. When I grew up, we had a metal shop, we had wood shop, we did all those kind of things. What we did, we reiterated or re-emphasized what they learned in their math class. We don't do that anymore. We make the best mechanics in the world in the rural communities, but we don't give them the tools to do what they need to do any longer. We send all the money to King County. We give them a bunch of money to build a road, a big tunnel project that carries less traffic than the project that we had before, that also carries less traffic than a less expensive project would carry. We can't vote with King County any longer. We must vote with the rural community, jobs, values, and traditions. They can't have them anymore. We need to stand up and say, we have 10th Amendment rights in the 35th District. The state can say, no, you're not going to release wolves into our Wild Olympics and terrorize our people. We can say, no, you're not going to take our timber trust lands that we use to manage our schools. We can do this thing because we can take back rural jobs, values, and traditions and say, King County, you can't have them any longer. My name is Dan Griffey. You can tell I'm kind of passionate about this, but it is time we take back our communities. Thank you.